School of the University of St. Gallen, where I teach innovation and leadership. And I think it is a bit in this function that I'm speaking to you today. I want to talk about leadership development, but leadership development at scale. What I mean with that is the following. There are a lot of leadership development programs out there that touch very few people. And because of the reason that they touch very few people, they have a limited impact, but they also have limited impact for a number of other reasons. And what we just heard before is that a number of leadership development programs today are being regarded, or a large part of such programs are being regarded as not successful. And we wondered, why is that the case? You have some of the best organizations on the globe, be that business schools, be that professional service firms, be that specialists, that are putting a lot of thinking and a lot of energy in designing great programs, and yet the impact is very limited. So we wanted to understand, why is that the case, and what can be done to ensure that money spent on developing leaders works and is used effectively. Now, what I want to talk today is about three themes. First of all, is that businesses and us as a society are facing an unprecedented challenge as the world is adopting new technologies. A huge number of people will need to be reskilled or upskilled in the next 10 years. The problem is that no one is really taking care of this. On one side, universities aren't, because most of the money that is spent for education stops at the age of, say, 25. But a lot of people need to be reskilled. And so that's not going to happen through universities. The expectations is that business organizations do this. However, as we will see, the statistics on the capabilities of business organizations to upskill people are very poor. But while they are very poor, that's not a given. And with thoughtful design and thoughtful delivery, leadership development programs can be effective in organizations, and they can be effective at scale. So these are the three theses I would like to discuss with you today. Let me start with asking you about these three numbers: 50%, 40%, and 65%. Technology that is already existing today is expected by 2030, so in 10 years from now, to replace 50% of current positions. This is a statistics for the US, but it doesn't look that differently in other economies. 40% of the people, or the workforce, will be working in the gig economy. So in some form of platform or marketplaces or technology-enabled business models, and will not have a fixed salaried position, but some form of part-time or some form of highly flexible job contract. And what is striking, especially for someone that works at university, is that 65% of the graduates that are today going through university and will soon graduate will work in 10 years in jobs that don't exist today. So that gives you a sense of the magnitude of the transformation that our economies and society is facing over the next 10 years. This is not over the next 30 years. This is not over the next 50 years. This is over the next 10 years. You can visualize the next 10 years. And when you talk to your children that are at university now and they're studying for a profession, it's highly likely that that profession won't exist in 10 years down the road. Are you still seeing the presentation?
No, Claudio, somehow it is.
Okay, let me try. Let me try to upload it again.
Okay.
See, there it is. You can hear me?
Yes, now it is visible. Good. And you are audible.
Good. So these three numbers give you a little bit of a sense of the magnitude of the transformation. It's happening really fast. You know, it's about advanced analytics, machine learning, or machine learning. It's about artificial intelligence, blockchain, cloud computing, Internet of Things, robotics, augmented reality or virtual reality. These are all technologies that are finding their way in the economy. They allow to lower costs. They allow to process or design processes so that they run significantly faster. New business models can operate 24/7 and so forth. You know all of this. What is striking is the speed at which this is happening. And it's striking to see, let me see. I have a hard time to, there we go. So, you can see the charts?
Yes.
Good. I'm not used to this technology that much, so I hope we can do this well. So if you look a little bit around you, today the world's largest hotel service, Airbnb, doesn't own a single hotel or a single bed. Uber doesn't own a single car, and Alibaba doesn't own a single store. And none of these organizations existed 20 years ago. That gives you a sense of the speed of change. And it's not only these, you know, famous startups. Everybody talks about Alibaba, Amazon, Google, and so forth. Everybody is using new technologies. Novartis is redesigning its clinical processes using advanced analytics. FedEx is using blockchain. Machine learning is used by Ericsson. Pfizer, IBM, Textron, so many are using cloud computing. I mean, I could go on and on and on. The new technologies are not only being used by these famous attackers, but we typically read and see documentaries on. These technologies are finding their way into the economy at a, you know, incredible speed. And as a consequence, roughly, you know, up to almost 400 million people will need to be reskilled globally in the next 10 years. Again, we're not talking about the next 50 years. This is not something that you know, represents a long-term trend. It's here. You know, you can visualize the next 10 years how this is happening. So the amount of people that needs to be reskilled or upskilled is just mind-boggling. And what do they need to be skilled on? So what we are seeing is that physical and manual activities are decreasing. Basic cognitive skills, basic clerical skills are decreasing. The amount of people needed that performs those activities is going to decrease because this work is being taken over by robots and by artificial intelligence of one or the other sort. What is necessary, what will be more in demand, is higher cognitive skills, creativity, critical thinking, decision-making, unbiased decision-making, better forecasting, better understanding of the facts. This will be the higher cognitive skills that will be in request. But also social and emotional skills will become more important. Empathy, conflict management or conflict resolution, the ability to manage teams, create psychological safety and trust in teams, the ability to deal with diversity and connect to different profiles. These will all be important skills that people will need or will be in more demand going forward. And obviously and clearly technological skills. Excel is more or less that. Python is how analysis is being done today, among others. So you see a significant shift in skills and a massive need for upskilling of people that are in the workforce today, but also people that will continue to come to the workforce in the next 10 years, will continue to be reskilled and upskilled as they go. Because many of the things that we're learning today at university will simply not be relevant anymore in the next 10 years. Now, the issue is that, if you look at what universities are doing today, even though skills are becoming quickly obsolete, yet the vast majority of money is spent on people that are between 17 and 25 years old. After that, very little is happening. So it was really be corporations, businesses that do this. The problem, most programs fail, even when it comes to leadership development. So let's say training the top 200, 400, 500,000 people in large organizations. Even there, and these are the programs that get most attention. These are the programs that get most funding. These are the programs that get the highest level of science and quality devoted to. Even those programs fail. 8% of the Fortune 500 CEOs see business impact of their leadership development interventions. 5 in 6 companies report that they achieve limited or no organizational impact with L&D activities. 87% of leaders want a drastic change in how their organizations develop employees and leaders. So that gives you a sense of the issue. That gives you a sense of the size of the issue. On one side, we have to reskill and upskill nearly 400 million people globally in the next 10 years. But nobody can do this really. Universities aren't doing it, and businesses aren't particularly good at it. So against this background, we asked ourselves, okay, what can we do? What can we do to better, and this was with my McKinsey hat on, what can we do to help organizations become better? What's the successful code or the code to develop successful leadership development programs? We worked with 165 organizations, surveying more than 375,000 people, trying to understand what works, what doesn't work. We interviewed over 30 leaders and CHROs. We run a survey with over 500 senior executives, trying to understand in their organizations which of the 50 leadership development actions that we identified as recurring have the highest impact and which one the lowest. We also interviewed all the McKinsey colleagues that are working in this field. McKinsey works roughly on 120 to 150 leadership development programs every single year. And so we wanted to capture the learnings that they had on what worked and what didn't. Based on all of this work, we concluded that while a lot of measures matter, and that making a leadership development program work is demanding and requires a lot of rigor. At the end of the day, there are 4 main themes that emerge from our analysis. One is to focus the interventions, the leadership development interventions, on what matters for business performance and for business strategy. Secondly, and I will go a little bit deeper into this conversation, secondly, is not just to touch a little bit of the organization or touch the organization in little bits, but to engage a critical mass of people through the leadership development program so that we see organizational change. Thirdly, that programs are designed leveraging latest insights from neuroscience. You'd see that a lot of leadership development programs today are still designed and delivered based on findings that no longer are valid. And finally, and probably most importantly, is if leadership development does not fit the entire organizational context, and I will explain that in more depth, leadership development programs regularly fail. So let me go into each of those, but before I do so, any questions at this stage?
Claudio, I have not seen anything in the message box so far, and we can wait for more questions at the end of the session so that all of us can participate.
Good.
Thank you.
So then let me go on. So let's go into the topic of critical shifts. This is a study done by the university I work now, the University of St. Gallen, trying to understand what do organizations that claim their leadership development programs work or are effective do differently than those that are critical about their own leadership development program. One of the most important points is that they link leadership development to corporate strategy. Let me explain, or let me illustrate this the following way. Sometimes we are asked by clients to come and work on a leadership development program because there is some hot new topic somewhere in literature emerging. Let's say psychological safety was a big topic after Amy Edmondson did a study at Google. And so some clients call and say, we need a program to foster psychological safety. Or we need a program to foster agile thinking in our organization. Now, these are good topics. However, they might be completely unlinked to corporate strategy. Say that the corporate strategy requires the organization in the next 3 years to massively restructure a number of business processes. These are all good skills, what I mentioned before, but they might not link necessarily to the activities that are needed in the next 3 years. So while people are stretched to deliver the strategy, then they go to an island of learning where they learn about things that, are nice to know, are good to know, and, but they're not particularly relevant to that moment, to that organization. So one of the things that we see again and again is that leadership development programs are developed from the LD perspective with what we think is relevant or what could be relevant or what is new, and not necessarily deriving from the corporate strategy. In order for us to implement those ambitious objectives that we have laid out in the corporate strategy, what are the 2, 3, no more, 2, 3 skills that will make the biggest difference? And it seems like the LD champions, as they are called in this study from the University of St. Gallen, 9 out of 10 derive those skills from corporate strategy. The second topic is about breadth depth, and pace. So what we see a lot is leadership development programs that have either of these two characteristics. One, they focus on very, very few people. So let's take 30 at a time. And let's do that with n-2 people. We can't do it with n-1 or with the CEO because they don't have the time for that. And, they wouldn't be willing to do this. Also, we are a bit concerned doing the program with them because if it doesn't work, that's high exposure. So let's focus on the n-2. And let's take 30 at a time. So let's do a pilot. If the 30 work, let's do another 30 next year, and let's do another 30 the year after. The problem of that is that, and we will see this a little bit later, that's theme number 4. If we don't involve top management, and if it doesn't emanate from top management, it's very unlikely that n-2 will make a difference. Also, taking 30 at a time, say, out of a group of maybe 400, 500 leaders, taking 30 at a time means that it will take forever for these people to be trained. And it also will mean that a lot of the learnings that one wanted to provide are being lost in the process. One of the big advantages of having, let's say, 200, 300, 400 people going through a program at the same time is that they remind themselves, they nudge themselves continuously. One of the big learnings of behavioral change in adults is repetition, is practice, is being continuously nudged and reminding what you learn, so you continuously practice it. But if let's say a large group of people goes through it, then automatically they will refer to it. They will refer and remind each other, hey, wait a second, we learned that's the way to do it. We're not doing it this way now. Why aren't we doing it this way now? Let's remind ourselves. If enough people go through that, these automatically will create nudges, memory, and facilitate the practice of new skills. But if very few people go through it, that's not going to happen. So based on our work and our research, we believe that between 5 and 15 people of an organization need to be involved. It needs to be a continuous involvement, not just episodic, because otherwise people will forget. And finally, it needs to happen fast. It cannot happen over 4 or 5 years. Strategy will change over 4 or 5 years. New priorities will come. And those that will have gone through the program at the beginning will not have that, will not have a big impact on those that will follow later. It's going to be almost like independent from each other. So breadth, depth, and pace matters a lot for leadership development programs to be effective. What also is noticeable is that if you look at how leadership development is done today, a vast majority of leadership development programs are done still in classrooms. So you take people for a week, for 3 days, for 4 days, you put them in a workshop, and they have a class, they get some insights, then they go back to work, and then they forget. Leadership development programs work best when they are embedded on the job, not off the job. And what you see today is that a lot of leadership development done by L&D leaders in organization, HRs in organization, and by many providers still built on a picture of how adults learn that is no longer valid. If you think about what we learned from neuroscience and what matters, people don't like to change. Fundamentally, people don't like to change. It has to do with the construction of our brain. Change creates insecurity and anxiety. That's because You might be familiar with the science, exploration and exploitation, or innovation or creativity and execution. Execution is a repetitive task. It's a low energy task, something that is done and steered to some extent by the limbic system. Change, innovation, exploration, trying things, new things, is something for which we need to activate the cortex. That takes energy. But it's also not what our brain likes to do. So fundamentally, people don't like change. In order to change, organizations need to stretch their people. They need not to stretch them by telling them you need to learn how to innovate. They simply need to put very ambitious business targets. Very ambitious business targets. Organizations don't innovate by creating innovation teams. Organizations invent by creating innovation teams. Innovation is done in the line, is done by people, by organizational unit being stretched and trying to find new solutions, discovering new solutions. And when the new solutions are found, continuously or implement those, execute those continuously, and through that learn new skills. It also happens that organizations learn faster and people learn faster if there is a positive framework and if they can leverage their own strengths. So they have room to explore themselves, how and what new behaviors they want to apply. And if there is enough coaching and reflection room for them to reflect on what they learned, applied, and therefore there is also some room for, or there is need for, coaching and mentoring to do so. These are some of the principles that really matter, but we don't see that many leadership development programs to be built this way. In particular, the first point, stretching. Stretching is not something that happens in the leadership development program. Stretching is something that happens by organizations. Some of these themes might sound familiar to you, or at least to those who have worked or read Bob Kegan's work. Bob Kegan is a psychologist in Harvard and probably one of the leading thinkers in adult learning. And he recently published a book which is called The Deliberately Developmental Organization. And the principle of a developmental or a deliberately developmental organizations is that they stretch their participants. They allow them to self-discover solutions, but then they provide support, mentoring, and coaching so that they learn and they advance. So it's stretch and support, stretch and support. And one of the issues is that leadership development programs seldomly are in a position to stretch individuals. That's done through target setting, performance management. And here comes the last point, theme number 4. I can't change, unfortunately, I can't change the slide.
Claudio, would you like to share again then? Stop and share?
Yeah, I'll stop and share. Let me do it again. Let's see. There we go. There we go. So let me go to the 4th point. It's very hard for a leadership development organization or L&D organization or an HR organization to stretch individuals. It's the business, it's the line that needs to stretch individuals. And that's one of the key points of successful leadership development programs. They're done by top management. They're done by top management because they set the objectives for the organization. They set the objectives for the units. They set the objectives that are then broken down to individuals. So it's important that the expectations by top management are clearly set. It's also important that senior leaders show the new way. If we expect people to change their behaviors and develop new skills, this is social learning theory, they need to be shown what that behavior is. And incentive systems need to be aligned. Sometimes we have these situations that people come to training programs, then they go back to the organization, and the organization just does not appreciate what they learned. They don't need what they learned, and so they just forget. It needs to be aligned with the incentive systems of an organization. Then, only then, training programs work. So, in a nutshell, it's very important that a leadership development interventions is embedded into the organizational ecosystem. Leadership needs to be not only endorsing it, needs to show the way, and it needs to embed it into an organizational context. The next page, which again I cannot show. Stop share again. So on this page, again, going back to the study that I mentioned at the very beginning from the University of St. Gallen, here the question is, who decides about the budget? Who sets the L&D standards, the objectives? What are the initiatives that are being launched in the L&D space, and who is responsible for those? And what you can clearly see is that where we have firms that identify themselves as organizations where leadership development programs are effective, they always have those decisions being driven by top management. So in a nutshell, let me summarize. Leadership development programs will become enormously important for organizations in the next 10 years. Millions and millions of people will need to be reskilled and retrained, and they cannot be sent to university to do so. It will happen in organizations. But organizations need to become significantly better at delivering leadership development programs if they want to be able to change and develop new skills in organizations. That requires 4 main themes. Number one, not to train coincidentally important or fashionable themes and skills, but focus on those 2-3 skills, no more than that, that are really relevant for strategy implementation. Number 2 is to touch the organization as a whole, not just very few people. It's not a sequence of pilots or small interventions that will change and develop new skills in an organization at scale. Thirdly, it needs to build on principles of adult learning, on modern principles of adult learning. The key words there are stretch and support. Where L&D interventions do the support, the stretching is done by the business. And finally, if top management is not only supporting, but driving it, and if the interventions are not embedded into the organization, also in terms of incentive systems and organizational design, if these 4 themes are not being addressed, it's hard to see how firms can play a significant contribution in developing the skills that will be needed in the next 10 years. At this point, let me ask you questions.
Thank you, Claudio. Please raise your hands or the flags so that we can take up the questions from you.
Yeah, Claudia, I've got a question for you. Can I go ahead? Hello?
Please continue.
Yeah. You made a point for stretching people outside their comfort zone. The business needs to set very ambitious targets. But ambitious targets sometimes translate into unrealistic targets. So will it not be, stretching too far, breaking the person down rather than, developing him as a leader?
The question is, it's a very fair point. Thank you for the question. The question is, what is a stretch target? It needs to be realistic and possible, but it is important that individuals are stretched, that it's not clear for these individuals how they will achieve their targets when they get them.
Okay.
Now that doesn't mean there's a lot of echo.
Sir, can I ask a question, sir? Sir, I am from Bhubaneswar.
Excuse me. Yeah, Claudio, let's continue.
All I wanted to say is that stretch is a very individual question. I cannot tell you whether a 50% improvement or a 20% improvement or a 10% improvement is stretched, because it depends on the situation, on the individual. And also, importantly, what is stretched today might not be stretched tomorrow, because as the organization advances and people get more comfortable, the stretching can increase in size. So the key point though, is, I agree with your point, is not to exaggerate and ask for a moon or a shot to the moon, but it is important that it is uncomfortable for people.
Okay.
Otherwise, they're not forced to learn.
Yeah. Okay. I got your point. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudio, for taking my question. My name is Vivek Kaul. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Sometimes organizations work in silos, and it may be possible that you may give stretch targets to a particular individual in a particular function, which doesn't connect with the other functions which are still mired in the past. So the danger is that in putting any kind of stretch to performance, if the overall organization design is not addressed, there might be issues that will create hurdles within the organization to achieving those targets.
Yeah. So thank you for the point. It's a very valid point, and it allows me to say two things. Number one is, it's yet an example of the fact that the leadership development program, also the stretching, needs to come from the top. If an organizational unit down the line does that, it almost penalizes itself in a way. So it needs to really come from the top. And the second point is, you're very, very right. Leadership development program isolated from organizational design. That was the point before. Leadership development needs to be embedded into the entire organizational context. And sometimes leadership development program will work when it's accompanied by organizational design. Absolutely.
Perhaps a solution might be to push the stretch of targets to a little later, when at least some investment has been made in different functions to create some kind of delta or change in the existing leadership paradigm within that function.
Vivek, it's hard for me to judge, because I think it depends a lot on the situation. But I think the principle is, and that's, unfortunately, sounds very uninspiring, but people don't like change.
Thank you. Very fascinating presentation. Thank you very much.
Can I ask a
Can I pose a
question?
question, please? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just wondering, stretching to me sounds sometimes negative, it sounds negative to me. What I personally feel, and that too on the basis of my experience, that leader is the one person who is able to identify the capabilities of each and every employee and accordingly adjust him into that task and keep motivating him. I think we can extract the best out of the employee if instead of stretching, we make them do what they enjoy doing and motivate them, train them to do that. I think without stretching, our objective will be met and they'll be able to deliver their best. So, yeah.
Yeah, let me comment on this. I don't disagree with what you just said at all. That we need to leverage strengths of people and provide a positive context. It's absolute correct. I don't that's also very consistent with what I said and I showed before on the slides. But and maybe the word stretching has a negative connotation, but this is the giving people space and room for growth, giving people space and questions that they don't know how to solve so that they can think about this and create something new. So if maybe the word stretching is the wrong one, maybe that has a negative connotation, but the concept is relatively simple. If you want people to change, you need to give them tasks that allow them to do so.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Can I ask something, Claudio, please?
Sure.
You see, we basically we are talking about moving out people from their status quo mentality, right? But every business has its own challenges. When you say that we have to give on-the-job approach in these L&D programs, do you think these need to be customized?
Yeah, I think in many ways they need to be customized. First of all, what needs to be trained is very company specific. In some organizational units, let's say that the strategy requires a reorganization and we go from business units to a functional organization, which has a significantly higher degree of collaboration needs and being able to deal with different stakeholders. That's specific to that organization. Another organization might not go in the functional organization, might go and break down into small business units, and then decision-taking entrepreneurship, the need for decision-taking and entrepreneurship is significantly higher. So the skills will be different by organization.
So sorry, please continue. Sorry.
So absolutely, I think they need to be customized in terms of skills and capabilities that are needed for strategy. But also, it's very simple to say, we need to touch breadth and speed and etc. But there are specific organizations that have constraints, and sometimes you need to work around those constraints, trying to optimize them, but still respect on those constraints. Sometimes it's just not possible to, put enough coaching there simply because of expense pressure. And even though you know that it would be fast by doing that, it needs to be adjusted because there are constraints. So any leadership development interventions, in my mind, need to be customized.
No. Obviously, they are based on the ambition or the targets, whatever.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I will look at the.
Arun, it's very hard to. Arun, let me see what I understood your question. Let me understand what your question. How to address the ROI question in leadership development programs? Okay. So the classic way to do leadership development or to assess the leadership development programs is to ask participants of a workshop how they thought the workshop was and whether they would recommend it to colleagues. And typically you get a score between 9 and 10. Why? Because you take them to a nice place in a nice hotel or a nice retreat, you treat them well, they can have great conversation, it's very, very engaging, and so everybody thinks has been a great experience. In terms of impact, it's pretty much zero. So that's how it traditionally has been done. The way we are suggested to do it is the following, is that each member or each participant of a leadership development program, if appropriately stretched, has a business objective. At the end of the program, we ask that participant to tell us what percentage of the achievement of the business objectives he or she would attribute to skills learned in the program. And then we ask the superior of that person to validate that estimate.
Okay.
And against that, which is a quantifiable impact, and we don't do an MPV, we just measure the year for simplicity. You could do the MPV if you wanted. We just measure the impact in the year. We calculate the ROIs.
Okay.
Does that sound right, Arun?
What is MPV?
Yeah.
What is MPV, Claudio?
So you could also take not only the impact of the year, but the impact of all future years, and then you discount that and you have a net present value. Because you could make the argument that if I build a skill, that skill remains, but that becomes then, a debating about numbers. And frankly, the ROIs are high enough that it doesn't even, we don't bother looking at future years. We just look at for this year. If you had to improve, sales by 30% or grow, sales by 8%, and you grew them by 9, of those 9%, how much would you attribute to the skills learned in the program? And the person would say 1%. Okay, then we take that 1% and just for the year, that's the benefit, and the cost is always the cost of the interventions. So the programs, the coaching, etc. Make sense?
Thank you very much. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, Claudio. This is Nalini here. Thank you for a wonderful session. You alluded earlier about leveraging some of the existing influential leaders in the organization to also make this more impactful on the job. So I have 2 questions. One is your thoughts on sponsorship beyond just mentoring and coaching to generate more diverse leaders in an organization. One is that, and second is, how do you build this framework into the performance management and, more importantly, the grading and the promotion system within the organization?
Good. So let me take one at a time. So let's do the first one about creating momentum and influencing or using influencers. One of the organizations that we serve has an annual survey where they ask people being led to rate their leaders in terms of inspirational leadership. So how inspiring do you find this leader? We take the top half, but we make them champions for the program. These are the people that people follow. These are the people that are being influenced. They might not always be the highest leaders, although those we want part of the program too for another reason. But what we try to do is to use people that are being seen in the organization as inspiring, as influencer. Because This goes back to social learning theory. We learn behaviors and values copying other people. That, how we do this. That's in a nutshell what social learning theory does. And that's in a nutshell, by the way, where this whole discussion about role modeling comes from. We copy behavior of people that are more Sorry? Nalini, I think that was your first point. The second point is, how is this embedded into the... Hello?
Some of you need to be on mute, please. Claudio, let's continue.
Yeah, so Nalini, you had two questions. One is, how do you achieve scale and leverage influencer? This was one of the points on the slide. The second one is, how should this be embedded in the performance management system? If I understood you correctly. And my point early in the presentation is it absolutely should. It absolutely should in two ways. Number one is the stretch target side, but also the incentive system need to reinforce the need for changes of behavior and the learning of new skills. If people aren't stretched or provided the opportunities for growth, and if people are not supported in that or remunerated in that, if they are remunerated for a different behavior than the one that we're discussing here to be trained, they won't pick it up. It's as simple as that. So and that's also a little bit a point that I wanted to make before. Once I was asked by an European telecom. We had a meeting with the responsible for the L&D program, and I wanted to do an L&D program for the top management. And she asked all the right questions, but then I asked, but wait a second, who sets the targets and who manages the incentive system? This would need to be aligned. And her answer was, well, that's not me, that's not my department, it's another department. But look, they don't want to, let them by themselves. We just need to do the leadership development. That basically to me was an answer like, okay, maybe we shouldn't do this because, you're going to spend a lot of money, but it's not going to really happen. If it is not embedded into the rest of the organizational context, including the performance and incentive system, it's not going to work. So that was a long answer, Nalini, but I hope it was helpful.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Claudio, I have one or two questions picked up from the chat box. Maybe it will be good if you please help to address. It's already there. Sure. It is from Shuriya Jedigunta. He says that in this new cognitive dominated world, how does the board's composition, responsibilities, and skills change the coming years? Should I repeat?
Yes, please.
Okay. In this new cognitive dominated world, how does the board's composition, responsibilities, and skills may change in the coming years?
So, let me disagree with the premise. Not sure whether it's fair to say it's a cognitive dominated world. There is a lot of research that indicates that not only higher cognitive skills, but most importantly, a lot of social and emotional skills will be important going forward. The thesis is relatively simple. A lot of simple cognitive jobs are being taken over by machines. And there are a few things that machines cannot do. Creativity, they cannot do. That's a higher cognitive skill, but empathy, connection, working with diversity is something that machines can't. But regardless of of how we want to frame how the future will look like and how we want to describe it. The key questions is how will boards change in the future? Let me share with you the following thesis. Organizations will need to adapt faster. They will continue to be able to execute their strategy, but at the same time continuously innovate and find new ways to adapt. You've seen how quickly attackers are dominating or are entering and getting dominant positions into markets. We've seen transportation, we've seen hospitality, we've seen retail. Now, existing organizations need to adapt. Adaptation is something that requires skills. Requires teams. Just to support this claim, look at the Nobel Prize winners over the last 100 years. 100 years ago, Nobel Prize winners were predominantly individuals. Nowadays, Nobel Prize winners, regardless whether it's natural sciences or social sciences, regardless, the winners today are predominantly teams. And so teams play an amazingly important role for adaptation. Now, what do we know about what makes high-performing teams? We know a few themes, but I think two themes that are clearly and very loudly are diversity, number one. There are plenty of studies showing how diversity matters. And it's not only gender diversity, it's also psychological diversity. You need to have creative people, executing people, people that are extrovert, people that are introvert, people that are good and conscientious and getting stuff done. So it's the diversity of people that makes great teams. And the second thing is the ability of those people to trust each other and work as a team, which is in modern language is often referred to as psychological safety. But it can also be trust, can also be respect for each other. Whatever we want to call it or however we want to call it, diversity will increase, but also attention to team dynamics will increase going forward. So in terms of composition, we will see more diverse teams. There will be more, it will be more gender diverse, but it also will be more personality and experience diverse going forward. Because organizations need innovation, and innovation only happens through well-performing teams. So that was a long-winded answer to say that teams and boards will become more diverse.
Thank you. This is PK Chakravarti from Kolkata. I would like to ask you one question with regard to this leadership management development programs. I was listening carefully what you have been saying so far. Now, I have personally conducted a couple of leadership management programs and with top universities and management institutes. Now, have you come across, considering the overseas exposures, if any, that is there any objective evaluation techniques available somewhere from where we can understand how far these management development programs, the leadership development programs have become, more or less efficient, and they're really serving the purpose for which they are being conducted? Because in many cases what happens, some of the candidates who participate in these programs finally say that they have not actually achieved for which the program was actually considered. But in some cases, they also say that, no, we have really learned something and we are successful and we have become more wise, in fact. But so, considering the overseas exposure,
Hello?
that this will some kind of, as we have got a board evaluation, this thing, is there any objective assessment techniques available at the moment? This would like to know. Yes.
Yeah. So what we encourage every company to do is to use ROIs to measure the impact. And ROIs, I explained it a little bit earlier, is not only to look at the cost and get some qualitative sense of, oh, I thought this was great, or I learned something, because most people like going to leadership development programs, but it's really making sure that we measure at micro level, at the individual level, what percentage of his or her objectives achievement is due to skills learned during the program, and it's a quantification of that. So my advice would be, let's not ask people qualitatively whether they thought it was a great experience. It's mostly yes, but let's make sure that it links to business performance.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you as well.
Thank you.
Okay, Claudio, I think we have exceeded the time I have requested you, and thank you so much. We have many more questions which are there in the chat box, or maybe there are audience who are trying to ask more questions, but in the paucity of the time, let us put a close over here. I thank you, Claudio, for the time and the time out you have from your busy schedule and devoting this time for us, and which is really a good one, and we were enlightened throughout this session today. Your speech, your presentation, and the insights, particularly the data supported, all the presentations were supplemented by facts as well as the data. It gives us a very penetration in our mind that yes, they are backed up by some evidences. Thank you so much, and we are looking forward for your continued support in the coming days also at a suitable topic, either you choose or we choose. That's up to us. Right.
Thank you, Santa, for having me and the privilege of presenting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We really enjoyed the discussion and the deliberations. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, and see you sometimes again. And the participants, thank you for your presence. It made a big difference to all of you. Thank you, and bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Claudio.
Thank you. Bye-bye.